My name is Bozenna Urbanowicz. I'm a Polish Catholic Holocaust survivor. I was born in Poland in 1934. I'm 79 now. I'm the oldest of 4 children. My family, my father, mother, they were farmers. I remember specifically when that end of Poland, the far eastern end of Poland, which became Ukraine now, I remember the communists came to our area first. And in school, I remember my teacher telling me, when the communist inspectors come at Christmas time, we were not allowed to practice religion. When the communist inspectors come at Christmas time, they're going to ask you certain questions, and we were told how to answer. When they did come, they asked us, children, and who gives you candy? And we were taught to shout, Papa Stalin gives us candy. And they would reward us throwing lemon drops. In those days, the lemon drops in Polish were called landrynki. They wanted us to forget about Christmas. Now you know who Stalin was, right? Okay, he was the communist dictator. I remember next, we were occupied. That end of Poland, far eastern end of Poland, was occupied by the Nazis. This memory is 1943 for me. I remember my mother sending me to the shed that was near the river, and my mother would say, Bozenna, take the food to the shed, but if anybody stops you on the road, speak to no one, turn around and come home. I was never stopped, but when I did reach the shed, the door would open and hands reach out for the food. I never saw faces, so I don't know if they were children, men, or women. I have no idea. I did as my mother asked me to do. The summer of 1943 was the worst summer for our people in that area. It's recorded in history that way. That summer in 1943, I am 9 years old, and in our area lived many Ukrainians, Poles. There were some German, 1 or 2 families. I just read about that. In that area, there was a group of the Ukrainian nationalists. They were not our neighbors, but there was a very powerful group, very vicious group. They collaborated with the Nazis, and they offered to kill all the Poles and the Jews in the area, because the Ukrainian nationalists made a deal, so they thought, with Hitler, that if we help you kill the Jews and the Poles in the area, you will help us win free Ukraine. Ukraine wanted to have its freedom from Russia. That summer in 1943, they were killing people. Every night somebody was attacked. I remember personally, I didn't understand, but I remember my mother and father in Poland talking about, oh, Frank Vranek didn't come home last night. I guess UPA got him. UPA were the initials of the Ukrainian nationalist group that was killing the people. But I didn't understand what UPA was. I didn't know. People didn't tell you, parents didn't talk about these things. And when they talked, usually we were out of sight, we were not around. That summer in August 43, I'm 9 years old, I remember everybody in the village, neighbors and our family, we would sleep out in the field. An adult would climb a tree, he'd be the lookout. Next night, another adult would climb a tree, be a lookout. But near the end of August, I think, my father said, "I've had enough. We're going to sleep in our own beds tonight." And that was the night that our next door neighbor came, and he knocked, rapped on the window, and my bed was right under that window, and I remember him calling out to my father, "Victor, Victor, this is the night." My father knew what that was. We got out of bed quickly. My mother said, "Shh, quiet, everybody." It's dark. We didn't have electricity, all candles. My mother said to me, "Bozenna, go and get those sweaters, jackets off the hooks," because we were still in our little white nightshirts. It was cool at night. As I'm going to get the nightshirts, I would, the sweaters, I would have to jump on a bench and to reach the hooks. But as I'm trying to do that, I'm looking over my shoulder, and my parents and my 3 siblings are going out the door. And I was afraid they'd leave me in the dark by myself. I was terrified. So I didn't reach for the sweaters, the jackets. I followed them out the door. We walk out to the road, dirt road in front of our house. And I remember my father saying, "We'll go to this way." And I thought to myself, that's a good idea. There's a bridge there. We can cross over and we'll be on the other side of the river, and we'll be pushing towards a city, Tuchin. And I thought it was a good idea. But as we looked in that direction, everything was burning. We saw people running across the road and screams like you wouldn't believe. Not human, but they were from human beings. They were being killed with pitchforks, knives, whatever. My mother said, "Let's go the opposite direction." And here, I'm 9 years old, I'm thinking, oh, that's a good idea. Grandma lives at the end of this road. We'll be safe. We'll be with Grandma. When we turned the bend, we noticed that that end is burning too. We were trapped in the middle by Upa. My mother takes my sister Christina in her arms, and my mother said, "Bozenna, hold on to Czesław and Irena and run after me through the wheat field." The wheat in August was tall already. My mother dives into the wheat field, and I'm supposed to follow her. I can't run as fast as she does. The faster I try to run, the wheat would tangle around my ankles. I would fall on my face, taking Czesław and Irena with me. By the time I stood up, my mother's even further. I am terrified, and I can't call out, because we're not too far from the road. What if somebody hears me? Suddenly I hear a crackle of wheat, dry wheat in back of me, and I can't call to my mother. I am terrified, and I don't want to turn around to look, because I might miss a step. Suddenly, I remember my mother turned around, and she sees a man in back of me, and I still remember how she gasped. We thought we were caught, but it was my father. Without telling us, he stayed behind for a few minutes to open the barns and stables, thinking he's going to return to his farm. That night, we slept in the wheat field near the river, and in back of the wheat field was a forest and then Grandma's house, and I remember Grandma's house burning. And I was thinking, now if Grandma's house is burning, the forest will go on fire, then the wheat field and will be exposed, and they're going to kill us. My baby sister, she was cold because I didn't get the jackets and sweaters. She started to cry. My mother was terrified somebody would hear us. And I remember my mother rocking my sister to sleep so she would be quiet. In the morning, we crossed the river, the shallow part of the river, and we found ourselves in an open field, in a meadow. And shots rang out from both sides. They were shooting at us. We fell to the ground and we crawled into the next forest. In that particular forest, an aunt of mine lived. My father and mother peeked in the doorway to see if they were home, did they survive, what's going on there. There was no one home, and to get off my aunt's property, they had a pond. You had to walk around the pond. And as we're walking around the pond, 3 bodies stand up. And I remember my mother and father got frightened. They thought we were caught. This is it. But it was my aunt and uncle and their teenage son. They spent the night hiding in the pond. We left them. We crossed another big main road to the city of Tucson. Another aunt lived there. We went to see if they were okay. The doors were wide open, chicken, geese running through the house. My mother went inside. She looked for clothes for us because we were still in nightshirts. And she made us something to eat. And I remember that at that time, when I was 9 years old, my favorite food was bread and butter, sprinkled with sugar. That was my favorite at that time. That's what I got. That was the last thing I ate in Poland. Then we left my aunt's home. There was no one there. We didn't know what happened to them. We went on a main road. By then there were hundreds and thousands of people pushing away towards the city. And I didn't see Germans yet. I didn't see any uniforms. So we must have been pushed by the Ukrainian nationalists who were collaborators. And we walked for a very long time, and finally towards the evening we found ourselves in the city of Równe, Poland. We were at a railroad station. It was evening, and I remember the Germans, we saw them there. The Germans gave the young Polish men and women guns to fight back because they told us that the Ukrainian nationalists are going to come back at night to finish us off. And there was a lot of shooting that night. The Germans offered the warehouse for those who want to sleep inside. My father said, no, I'm not going to be trapped inside. So we slept outside, and I remember the shooting all night long, and my father pushing my head into the ground. Bozenna, Bozenna, keep your head down. In the morning, they collected the guns. The Germans made us an offer we couldn't refuse. They told us that we can stay there, and the Ukrainian nationalists are going to come and finish us off. But we can go to Germany. It will be good in Germany. Adults will have a job, children will have clothes, food, school, and I learned my first German word very quickly. Schnell, schnell, schnell. And they started to push us into cattle cars. I'm a farm girl. I've never been on a train. I have no idea what a train is supposed to look like. And they're pushing people onto the platform and into the cattle cars. And I remember my mother, we lost track of our father someplace in the crowd on the platform. And we were already in the cattle car, and my mother was by the door screaming for my father, Victor, Victor, where are you? My father heard her, and he came to the door, and they yanked him up. The door shut, and we took off. The only thing I remember in the cattle car, there were no windows, there were just slits on top for air, and I was squeezed in next to a Polish young woman who had an infant in her arms, and she was begging people, please give me room, I want to nurse my baby. I remember that the train stopped on the tracks often, but the doors never opened. So you could imagine what the sanitary conditions would be after a few days. We would stand on the tracks for hours, and then the train would move. Then it would stop again, and we'd stand there for hours. Finally, we arrived in Germany, in Freiburg, Germany. The doors opened, and again, schnell, schnell, schnell. People started to jump onto the platform from the cattle cars, and they divided the people into groups. Where we're going to go. We were there for slave labor. Our group was about 20, maybe 30 people, not a very big group. I remember standing on the platform in Freiburg, and I said to my mother, there's people still sleeping on the floor of the cattle car. If they don't hurry up, they're going to be left behind. And my mother said, not to worry, just move along, move along. Only later did we hear that these people had died, and they left them there. In Freiburg, adults worked in a factory, tanning factory. They made boots and things out of leather for the Germans. We children were told to work in the field, clearing the field for the farmers for the next planting. I became very sick there. My mother didn't know what to do with me. I couldn't work. I would lay on the floor. We had no beds there. We were on the second floor. It looked like a school. There was a stage there with curtains, but there were no benches, no chairs. We slept on the floor against the wall. When I became sick, my mother asked some Germans at the factory, could you send somebody to look and see what's wrong with me? No one listened. Eventually, I'm still laying on the floor. A German man comes up the steps, and he calls me that I am to come and follow him. And I got off the floor, and I followed. I knew I am to obey. I followed him down the steps, and I remember the metal steps had no back to them, and the rail was very cold. I got down, there was a little black car waiting for me. He put me in a back seat, and we took off. And I'm already making up my mind that if I have a chance, I'm going to run away. But I don't know where I live. If I run away, where am I going to run to? I don't know where I live. Nothing. I'm trying to memorize landmarks. Nothing. I'm so sick. Nothing is, I can't hold that thought in my head. Eventually, I noticed we are approaching like a city almost. And there was to my right was a big building, 2-3 stories. And I thought to myself, I'm very sick. He's taking me to a hospital. But the car turned the other way. He takes me out of the car, and there were 2 women waiting in the door. And he hands me over to the 2 women, and he says to me, this is a place for people like you. I didn't know what kind of people I was supposed to be. He left, and the 2 women took me inside, took my clothes off, gave me a little white shirt. They shaved my head because I was infested with lice, and they put me in a room that had 6 beds. My bed was on the left in the middle. There was 1 window, and I remember trying so hard. I wanted to see people. I wanted to see a car, anything, life. I couldn't. I just couldn't register. Nothing stayed in my mind. It turns out that I had tuberculosis, TB. That's why they isolated me from the rest of the workforce. I remember I was so angry that I was there by myself and not with my family, and I didn't know if my parents knew where I am. That I deliberately wet my bed. And I remember the 2 women who came, they were very angry, talking to each other. And they took me off the wet bed. They bounced me on the next dry bed, changed my sheets, and bounced me back, always cursing, talking loud. But I made up my mind, I'm not going to open my eyes and let them know I'm awake. I pretended I was sleeping through all that. Another time when I was there, I dreamt that my mother came to see me, and she sat, on the left was a little wooden chair. She sat there and she stroked my hand and she talked to me. I thought it was such a wonderful dream. I wouldn't open my eyes because I thought if I opened my eyes, the dream would stop, and I didn't want it to stop. Only after the war did I learn that my mother did come to see me, but I didn't open my eyes. I didn't let her know that she did come to see me. She wanted to know if I was still alive. I learned this after the war. When they thought I was well enough or whatever, a different German man came with a bicycle to take me back to the family. And I was to ride on the handlebars, and I remember that day there was snow on the ground, but the sun was very bright and the snow was melting, and I was splashing mud all over my legs. When we finally arrived at our destination, I couldn't get my hands off the handlebars, and the German man plied my fingers off the handlebars, and we both kind of laughed about that. When my mother came home from work, she asked if I could rest for a day or two before going out in the field to work with the other children. I said, they told her no. When I got up in the morning, I had no shoes. Somebody stole my shoes. So I did what the other Polish children did. We wrapped our feet in rags and we went to work. It wasn't much longer after that. We were told we are being relocated. I remember old trucks, horse-drawn wagons came. They herded us onto we were in a truck, my family. And we're going someplace, they don't tell you where. We went through a city where we couldn't cross the street because a parade was going by. My father lifted me up and he said, Bozenna, Bozenna, look over there in the parade. That's Hitler. I had no clue who Hitler was. I knew he was famous, you know, but why? I had no clue. I wasn't interested. But in the parade was a two-seater motorcycle with a sidecar. Now, I'm a farm girl. I've never seen such a thing. I've never seen such a contraption. Now, that was interesting to me. But Hitler, that wasn't interesting. We were taken to a city called Chemnitz, Germany. It was all different there. The camp was in wooden barracks, enclosed by a fence, and inside the camp were Polish people, there were Ukrainians, and my mother said to me there were gypsies too. The adults worked 24 hours shifts at a munition factory making ammunition for the war front. My mother worked nights, my father worked days. The camp was located between the Chemnitz railroad station and the munition factory. We were in the middle. So the Allies tried to bomb either the tracks or the ammunition factory. So we heard sirens wailing and bombs falling around us all the time, night and day. One day, the Germans come to the factory and they arrest my father. They take him to the local station and they start interrogating him, and he doesn't know what it is they want to know from him. And he keeps telling them, I don't know anything, I don't know anything. They beat him terribly to get information out of him that he had no knowledge of. In the morning, they pulled out a letter and they showed it to him. This is what it's all about. And my father looks at the signature, and without thinking, He says, "That's not my signature, that's my wife's signature." They returned my father to the factory, it was his shift, and they came for my mother. I remember that moment as if it were yesterday. Two big Germans came for her, and my mother was very small. And they put my mother between them, and they started to walk her away. I'm standing there with my 3 siblings, and we're watching this. We don't know what's going on. And I remember my mother turned around to me and she said, "Bozenna, there are 3 Deutschmarks under the mattress. What am I going to do with Deutschmarks, German money? I'm in a slave labor camp, I can't leave." It seems that my mother wrote a letter to her brother in another camp, and she didn't have a chance to mail it. In the letter, she criticized how we were being treated by the Germans. She wrote something that the children are not going to last much longer. We're starving. And the Germans found the letter, and they thought my father wrote it, because my mother signed the letter J for Janina, for Jane Urbanowicz. And the Germans didn't notice, they thought my father wrote that. When they arrested my mother, that's the last I saw of my mother. My father asked them at the factory, the Germans, the foreman at the factory, where did they take my wife, Jane? And they didn't want to talk about it. But eventually a German did tell my father that they sent her to Ravensbrück concentration camp for women in Germany. And we lost track of my mother. Eventually, the Germans didn't know what to do with us in Chemnitz. They told us we're going to be relocated. Trucks, wagons came. They took us outside the city limits of Chemnitz. But I remember when they were bombing us, when the fence came down in Chemnitz, I was always curious who lived, what was behind that fence. I was always a curious child, my mother tells me. I was always hungry. And I remember I went on all fours and I crawled past the fence and I found that my knees were in the garbage. Oh, I thought to myself, where there's garbage, there's food. I started to dig for food. I found apple peels and I ate them right away. I felt guilty. I ate them all. I wanted more. I couldn't find any more apple peels, but I found potato peels. I gathered them up into my little skirt, and I'm going to bring it to the barrack, to the women there. They'll know what to do. As I'm standing up in the garbage, I noticed that on a little hill beyond is a white house, and on the 2nd floor I can see a beautiful chandelier. And I'm thinking, here's a kid in the garbage digging for food, and somebody lives so beautifully with a chandelier. At that moment it seemed to me the comparison was so ridiculously funny, but it was true. When the Germans took us out of the city of Chemnitz and dumped us on a sidewalk, everybody, they told us, don't turn back because we'll shoot. They threatened us. Go find the American front. No one knew where the American front was. But people started to break up into small groups. Everybody thought they had an idea. We were with another family, I think. We wandered in the forest. I remember eating berries and mushrooms that my father knew were safe to eat. I remember sleeping in an abandoned railroad car. I was terrified that night. I didn't